find in this life? Where can we find meaning? Has been the question in our series of Ecclesiastes again and again. Last week we looked at all how empty pleasure and wealth is, how even empty wisdom itself is to find meaning and reward and purpose in our life. And so now we get to perhaps one of the most famous passages of Ecclesiastes, of how every moment of our year has its own season. Every moment of our life has its season. It's all brought about through the hand of God. Little by little, we are seeing more and more what God is doing, what God's hand in a seemingly, appearingly meaningless world can be. And Koheleth, the author of Ecclesiastes, again and again, seems to have apparently pessimistic and dour and negative view of things. But let us here today see the hope of what it means for these days and these repeating seasons again and again have for us. So read along with me here in Ephesians 3, starting verse 1 to verse 15. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to plant. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant, a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill, a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silence. A time to speak. A time to love. A time to hate. A time for war. A time for peace. What gain has the worker from this toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet, so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. That is God's gift to man. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken away from it. God has done it, so that people fear before him. That which already has been, that which is to be, already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away. It's the word of the Lord. I remember when I was 9, I woke up on Easter morning, not with joy to celebrate Jesus' conquering of death, but anger at an apparent injustice that had been done to me and done to all the world of Wisconsin because it was April 1st. And the audacity God had to put snow on the ground on Easter morning. Yeah, I get it, it's Wisconsin, but in my defense, I'd only been around for about 9 winters and only been aware of about 5 winters, so I didn't understand the unseasonability of Wisconsin in April. So cut me some slack, yes. I was angry, I was furious. I, in my imagination, thought I could just go to the Army surplus store, get a flamethrower, and melt all the snow away. I thought that would be the most effective thing to do. Because this is wrong. This is supposed to be April, the season of pastels and cherry blossoms and the return of the music of birdsong in the air. Instead, there was a little green poking up through the snow all over the ground. I know, where had I been living? Wisconsin. But already at age 9, aware of probably about 5 winters, I had set up what I thought was the appropriate order of weather and seasons. And on that day, when we were called to glorify God for his power over death and sin, I walked into worship with some feedback I had for the conqueror of death and the almighty creator of all things. You've probably interacted with this, maybe not snow on an Easter day, but you've been planning an outdoor event, and you've encountered this kind of fear of uncontrol. I want the weather to be perfect for my wedding, but what if? What's the backup plan? For rain, or yes, even snow. Yeah, we can only control so much. But we cannot control the weather. We can make contingency plans, But weather always comes no matter what. Cannot control the timing of when the temperature drops or when the rain clouds open. And also, we don't determine the times and the seasons. We don't get to say to God, hey, it's April, no more snow. As much as I'd love to be able to have that kind of control, we don't. We are stuck in these laws and times of seasons that we don't get a say in. We don't determine, zooming out from climate and ecology, we don't determine when we have days of joy or sorrow. In those seasons of your own personal, the actually existential seasons, we don't control of what seasons of our life happen. When our joy comes, when our sorrow comes, when peace and war happens, one individual does not have that control. And so, because of that, we are continually set in time. We are living season to season. But I also want to see, as Koheleth remarks on too, that because we are so stuck in season to season, we also long to break out of that, don't we? We long for the eternal. We long for that which is everlasting and going on and on. There's curious reason for why that is. And yet lastly, Koheleth's commendation towards us is to enjoy God's good gifts, just as he did last week. And let us enjoy how God redeems all things, redeems the time before us. So let's consider the season-to-season life that we do live in. This is probably the most famous passage in the whole book of Ecclesiastes. The words of verses 1 through 8 have often been read at many funerals from believers and non-believers. There's a famous song from the 1960s by the Byrds that put these very words to song. Play it all through the radio, the Muse of Ecclesiastes. Wow, the Bible is a big hit from the 60s, right? Well, I think often these words people appreciate and find some beauty in it. Oh, that's so lovely. There is a time to love, and there's a time for peace, and all these wonderful things. There's a time to heal. Yeah, let's not cut out the fact that it says there's a time to hate, and a time to kill, and a time for war, a time to refrain from embrace. What are all these negative things? Is this a comfort passage? Or is it one that gives you despair? Good, deep Christians come away with both conclusions. Is Koheleth giving us something that gives us great comfort? Is Koheleth, as he is very often in this book, rather very negative and throwing his hands up saying, what can I do about it? What is the tone of these words themselves as he describes every event seeming to have an opposite? Every event seems to be put there by a specific time and purpose by God. If there's a time and season, literally the word season, this idea of time, means that it is appointed, it is set, it is fixed. And yeah, not by us, but by the Creator, the author of all time, has put these in place. And that means it has boundaries of life, of creation and destruction. Life, for everything there's a season under heaven. It covers things in life, a time to be born, also a time to die. Creative endeavors and destruction, a time to break down and time to build up. Human emotions, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn and time to dance. Friendship and enmity, a time to love, a time to hate, time for war, time for peace. Some people think the casting away stones and clearing of stones even refers to that, as if you're heaping stones on a field to give disadvantage to an enemy in war, and clearing away stones as a time for planting and peace. Lastly, a time of what we think about possessions, whether we keep them, lose them. All these things, all these areas of life are being covered in this song. And yes, there are seasons for every part of our life, but that means there's also a negative and a positive for each. And we don't get a say in when they are. For every equal and opposite time. Every season of building, there will be one of tearing down. For every season of peace, every moment of peace, there's also seasons of war. Is Koheleth happy or frustrated by this? If things are so fleeting, as we've said, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. If everything is fleeting, escaping our grasp, then also our painful seasons are fleeting, which is good, right? The fact that there is a fixed, set time to the seasons of mourning and that one day will pass away is good. But it also means those times of rejoicing are also fixed and set and fleeting away as well. Because of that, Koheleth almost sounds like he could get bored reading this. There's a kind of repetition and reading a time, that it kind of gets this feeling of cycle and almost hypnotic way of saying it just keeps going. The cycle keeps returning. Verse 14 of God pursuing after us is the idea God continues to spin the wheel of time again and again. For all the good things, there are equal seasons of hardship. For every sunny day with perfect 75-degree weather, there is a dark, cold morning of negative 10-degree wind chill. For every amazing wedding of laughter and joy and dancing, there's also a funeral with shocked and hollowed hearts, exhausted from weeping and mourning. So we should not be surprised when the good old days turn into the rotten new sleepless nights. As we noted earlier, it really reveals how little control we have to bring in the good times. Like a striving after wind is us trying to set and fix our seasons into eternal goodness and happiness. And so we walk season to season, but don't control them. We're not masters of them. We do not get to choose when we are born. And yes, having a baby makes that very clear. Eric and Heejin know that birth can come at any moment. Or Kay and Mike know that come much later than expected. Even for us, we really wanted Lila to be born on the 13th of October because Anna's birthday and my birthday is on the 13th of our own birth months. And wow, it'd be great if we were all 13s. And nope, she was born on the 12th. We didn't get to decide that. And I'm very grateful because then I would just get confused who's born in which month. And it would be hard to continue to do if we had more kids. So, good thing God determines when we are born. But we also do not get to choose when we die. Your final day here has been appointed, been set. And you weren't consulted. None of us get that luxury. I realize it's hard enough to reckon the fact that one day I'll die. Even harder to know that, you don't get a choice in the matter of when or how. Koheleth is frustrated that wealth and wisdom can't help him escape the fate of death. As he says, I'm going to die just like the foolish person. But even worse, wealth and wisdom can't help you select even the timing. That season has been set. We are stuck season to season. We don't get a say in that matter. We are stuck in time, moving season to season. And it is God who decides the seasons we are in. You could read this list of seasons and times and feel so hopeless, right? What's the use of trying to get your life in order if I can't make my life all dancing, building love, peace, and keeping, right? And embracing. That's the life I want, right? I want to eliminate those and keep those. What if that was my life? My own curated list of Ecclesiastes 1-8. Why do I have to go through these bad things? Why does there have to be war and killing and hate? Why? Which of those seasons are you in now, today? Because you might be in one of those happy, rejoicing seasons. There's new life, new relationships, new opportunities are before you. Or you might be a season right now of seeing so many others having more success in their jobs, happiness in their marriages, raising families. Or they're in a city close to their family while you are far from yours. People know what they want to do with their lives as if they've known ever since they were 5 years old, and you are still figuring it out. All you know is the season you're in right now is not it. And you're praying and hoping that this season changes with better clarity into something else. Perhaps you're in a season of mourning, a season filled with hate at how someone has sinned against you and hurt you. A season of feeling torn apart, just waiting for someone somehow to sew you back up. We realize that there has to be someone else who brings those times to us. Yes, we must go through them. And perhaps that makes you frustrated here this morning, angry at the season you're in. Or maybe a little bit fearful, because the season you're in is actually pretty good. And you wouldn't like to change things, thank you very much. And to be told that this season you're in of happiness and joy is set, has an end date too, and those negative ones are coming too. I think this frustration with seasons, this desire to break out of the cycle, to have things fixed and set and no longer changing, shows us something that Koheleth sees, that deep in our hearts, There's something else than just a life that lives season to season. But in our heart is eternity. In our heart is a desire to break out of the seasons and enter into something that is set forever. Verse 11 tells us that God has made everything beautiful in its time. And also he has put eternity into man's heart. Eternity into man's heart. But yet, so he cannot find out what God has done from beginning to end. That means we have in our hearts the capacity to seek out or understand something greater than what's before us right now. We desire something that will outlive us, perhaps, that transcends us, and we're reaching our hands out trying to understand that. But that is frustrating because while we're trying to reach out into the infinite, we're still tied to the earth. Gravity and time pulling us down. We're mortal. And here we are as mortals, stuck in time, left thinking and imagining about things outside our control, outside our lives, possibly even outside of time. Yet God placed in our hearts eternity. A lot of debate about what that eternity means, holam means. And I think in its essence, it does mean a desire to understand that which is eternal, the infinite, the ongoing. But this second part of eternity in our hearts is really fascinating. Yet we cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I'm going to invoke my very Wikipedia level understanding of astrophysics to prove this point. If I'm wrong at all, please don't get Neil deGrasse Tyson to actually me later if I'm wrong. But can we see everything in the universe? Is it actually physically possible for us to see everything in the universe? So I understand, no. That some things in the universe are so far away from us, where we are right now, and they are accelerating us from such a speed, this part I understand, it is accelerating even faster than the speed of light, which yet that shouldn't be possible and that doesn't make sense. But what that means is things are so far away and moving so fast that there are some things we might not actually see because it takes so long for the right light to reach us, and light is only going so fast and it's moving at such a pace, and here we are and it keeps moving, and we'll never see the light from those parts of the universe. We cannot understand what has been done from the beginning to the end. When we talk about infinite, is the universe infinite or not? From our perspective here on this planet, yeah, I know there's actual astrophysics in it that maybe are a lot more complex than I'm reducing it to. But from your perspective, you will never find out what God has done from the beginning to the end because you can barely even understand what he's doing right now. But yet, it's almost cruel. I'm not saying it is, but it almost feels like a joke to us that we can even see into a glimmer of the infinite, that there's eternity in our hearts, that we have a desire to peer into it. But it's not cruel, because it is a desire, a discontentment for the present world. If what I just described about seasons made you uncomfortable, made you anxious, made you frustrated, good. It means you're alive. It means that there's something inside you, a hunger for the infinite, a realization that you are caged in time and you long for something else, that you are restless. There's no wonder we build fantasies of time travel, of jumping back to a better season, or fast forwarding to a better season, or an ideal society. Or in the same way, a terrible fantasy of fast forwarding, jumping forward in time to a horrible future. We fear and desire season to season, a desire to control, a hunger for that. And what that should tell us is we are not made to be stuck season to season in an endless cycle. We are made for another world. Came across a longer quote from C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity. It sums this up well. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in the world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. If that's so, I must take care, on the one hand, never to despise or be unthankful for these earthly blessings, and on the other, never to mistake them for something else of which they're only a kind of copy, or echo, or mirage. I must keep alive in myself the desire for the true country, which I shall not find till after death. It's just like if you try around here in Madison for good food of another country, it's going to, I guess I can just end it there, right? It tastes like an echo, a mirage, an essence of a taste, of a hint of what it should be, actually. Those are all the good things of our life. It's just like, this is what you call it? This is what you're calling ramen these days? You know? It is just an echo, a mirage, a hint. So let us not be overly content, but also still be thankful that we're getting glimmers of it, that it's even there for us. That we are made for something better. We are not made to be here and we'll only encounter it till after death. Much more succinctly than C.S. Lewis, Augustine said, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in God. You feel restless, there's a reason for that. It's the eternity in your heart, a longing to break free. If you're restless in the season you're in right now, waiting for the next season to start, fear of losing this current season, don't be so distracted by those echoes and mirages of the promises of the season of love and healing and peace that only this world can satisfy, because those seasons are finite and will end as well. But we should desire for a season that is eternal, where good and beauty are fixed forever. If you desire out of this current season, that's not a wrong desire or selfish desire, but make sure it's placed. Yes, you can desire for earthly things. That's good. That's right. You should be thankful for the earthly pleasures we have, the earthly gifts we have, but see them as little down payments of another world where we will hold on to them forever. And so let us enjoy at present the good gifts we have from God. That verse 11 says that God has made everything beautiful in its time. God has made everything good, beautiful, the same idea. And what we are to do, there's nothing better for us when it says in verse 12 that we should be joyful. It means we should see the good. We should see good in the things in front of us. Identify the beautiful. As God is making everything beautiful, we should see that beauty in everything that we enjoy. The best we can do, as Kola concluded in our passage last week, the best we can do is enjoy the days in front of us, enjoy the pleasures in front of us. And some people read that as just kind of a hopeless throwing up your hands. Well, all right, just eat and drink and have a good time. No, what we eat, what we drink, is a small glimmer of something good made beautiful. That God is working. It is God's gift to man for us to at least take pleasure in the toil in front of us. But let's not miss that part of God's gift to experience pleasure and joy. That it is God's gift to experience that, and we should enjoy that good gift. After all, what does winter teach us? But what control we actually lack. Yet there's still beauty in that dark, cold morning. While everything is cold and dark, God sends snow to glitter against the lights at night. So we wake up and see the harsh, jagged, bare trees lovingly embalmed in a coat of white snow. We wake up every day in those next few months as snow departs, leaving ground that is brown and muddy, but God looks again to those trees and sends flowers of gorgeous pinks and whites in spring. In the summer, while the sun grows hot and harsh, with longer days of light as the evening cools out on the nice water air, where we can enjoy the creation of God. And even in fall, a season of deterioration, of last days, of leaves dying, falling to the ground, even God makes those things beautiful as he gives bright autumn colors. He makes everything beautiful in its season. In verse 11, it is God who makes them beautiful. Any pleasure we experience is directly permitted by God's hand. The season of dancing and laughter you are in comes from his hand. But not merely for your happiness. Let's not get confused there, that your pleasure and your joy is an effect, is an opportunity for you in it. It's not the purpose to make you happy. And I want to make sure that's clear, because if we conclude all the beautiful things in this earth are just to make us happy, then we also would have to conclude that the bad seasons are to make you miserable. Right? If all these good things are just for my joy, then all the bad things are for my misery. But instead, let us see a higher purpose at work. That God making things all beautiful are for God's purpose and His glory. We get to enjoy it. God making all things beautiful means Him redeeming the evil seasons as well. The evil seasons before us are not so that we are just merely miserable, but so we can understand what beauty is against the contrast of death and pain. And ultimately, Koheleth says that the effect of that is that we would fear the Lord. The response we should have to all of this, all of these different seasons, is that the eternal God and Creator, who has shared with us just a glimmer of His eternity, has given us seasons so that we understand what is beautiful and good. The response is worship. It's reverence to Him, glorifying Him and praising Him. Martin Luther wrote that to fear God is to have God in view and to know that He looks at all our works and to acknowledge Him as the author of all things. To fear God is to see Him working through all those things. So consider the season you are in and fear God in it, meaning look at God as the creator of that season, looking at your works in these evil days, and to acknowledge that He, in His power, makes things beautiful, that He redeems the time before us. It's God's gift for us, and we can worship Him for that. That's why you praise His name today. Even if you're in a season of war, of being cast away, of having the cast away parts of your life that you cherish, you're far from feeling the embrace of another. If you're in mourning, you are still not far from God's beautifying hand, who is still at work in this season now. Know that your longing to move on, to get out of this season, is ultimately longing for your Savior, Jesus. Because it is Jesus alone who breaks us out of this cage of our seasons. Jesus alone who brings us into the infinite, into the eternity, because it is Jesus, who is God in flesh, the infinite, the eternal, taking on mortal flesh and entering into this mortal world of season by season. And as Philip Reich in his book on Ecclesiastes beautifully pulls this out and maps over Jesus' work over this poem, that is Jesus who was born at the fullness of time, as Galatians 4:4 tells us. Jesus knew His time to be born. Jesus knew His time to die, as He says again and again in the Gospels, it is not my hour, because He knew the time to die. He knew the time to mourn at the front of Lazarus' tomb, even before He knew it was time to heal him and raise him from the dead. Jesus knows when to seek those who have been cast away, the lost sheep. But He also knew when to throw off and reject the Pharisees as whitewashed, empty tombs. He knew the time to proclaim who He was and shout out who He was, and yet while on trial stayed silent like a sheep before his shearers and opened not His mouth. Our Savior truly knew the seasons because Jesus was the author of all those seasons. He knew the times appointed by God because Jesus is God, and it's because He did that perfectly, fulfilled the law perfectly on your behalf. It is that longing that you feel for Him to break you out of this and into eternal life. That is how we know that the evil things before us can be redeemed, because of what Jesus has done by laying down His life on the cross. He redeemed the evil days before us, being killed, being hated. It was by that we know our souls may be redeemed. That we might one day in glory truly, eternally be good and beautiful in a season that will never end and be eternal. That is the promise that we have in our Savior. That is the true gift of putting our faith in the work of Jesus Christ, who truly knew the right time for each season, so that it's also through Him that things are redeemed and made beautiful. Even the darkest things like Jesus' death. The hour before He was betrayed absolutely was a dark moment of despair, morbidity. And we celebrate it here with language of death and of blood. Seasonal language of this doesn't sound appropriate for things like the joy of an Easter morning, right? But it was because through His death, the rending of His flesh, the spilling of His blood, that by faith we are saved. God made at that time beautiful somehow. why a cross can be beautiful, the sight of public execution can be beautiful. That the first Easter morning, figuratively speaking, was covered in snow and darkness and coldness. As the disciples hid away on that morning, the Messiah had died, yet they had no idea that this 3-day season of killing and death and mourning and hiding was about to explode into an endless season of rejoicing and praising and healing. So we cast our minds to that today, to that dark season of Jesus' portrayal, his crucifixion and death, and how it is a promise of the season of resurrection that we await one day into the eternal. It is through a dark season that we encounter at the Lord's table that we truly understand what beauty is, all through Christ, who tells us that on the night when he was to be betrayed, he sat with his disciples and he took the bread, having given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body which is for you." Same way after the supper, he took the cup and said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for the remission of sins. Drink from it, all of you." So as often as we eat this bread and we drink this cup, we are proclaiming the season of the Lord's death until he comes again. And so let us examine ourselves. Examine our hearts to fear the Lord, of our need to come before him for grace, of our belonging to him that we proclaim through baptism, membership in his church. If that's not you right now, if you're unsure of what it means to follow